there's a lot going on in the world today. One of the biggest things that we've got going on right now is the upcoming political races. And the reason why I say those are a big thing is because of what's going on in Oregon and in Portland. So I have been working on a podcast for quite a few months, producing and putting together a list of guests that I think are just going to be a mind-blowing experience for people that do want to listen in and follow my journey as I explore some of these ideas and thoughts and things that I really want to have as a kind of a catalog of ideas of things I want to pass on to my children in terms of some things that you want to think about as you go through your day and go through life, right? But I kind of took a little bit of a right turn when things started heating up here in the state of Oregon and Portland in regards to the political scene and what's going on with homelessness and crime and everything. So I started getting involved a little bit in politics. So as the things started heating up and we're kind of in the primaries, headed in the general election for the gubernatorial race, I decided to get a little bit involved. So I've been working with some of the candidates or some of the getting involved, kind of interviewing them, discussing things with their teams, supporting some of them financially, supporting them by showing up to events and whatnot, or brainstorming ideas. And one of the things that occurred to me is that there's a lot of people out there who necessarily don't have the time or the thought of how do you find out all this information about all these different candidates that are running for governor. So what I did was I decided that I would interview a few of them, and I interviewed Christine Drazan, Bridget Barton, and Brandon Merritt, all three that are running for the Republican Party for the governor of Oregon. And I want you to understand kind of how much of a spot I really put these three candidates in, and I really applaud them for being willing to do this with me. I said, I'm going to write 9 questions, and you're going to sit in a vacuum, not having heard the answers of any other candidates, not having heard my questions ahead of time, and I'm going to hit you blindsided with 9 questions that I think, if I were a voter or if I were running for governor, the things that I'd want my voters to say, or want my voters to hear me say, I guess I should say. So I wrote these questions in a way that I hope kind of got them off of their standard talking points. And so to give you guys an idea of who these candidates are, what they're about, and what they really think in terms of the policies and the way that they would lead the state if they were elected. So I asked 9 questions individually, and then I just shut up and let them just talk into a chamber. So I didn't want to give them any feedback. I didn't want to have any conversation on these questions. Just really try and dig in their minds and extract the best and the most truthful look at the way they looked at these things. And then what I did was I edited it down into the individual questions and put them side by side. So when I ask a question, you're going to hear the 3 answers from the 2 candidates side by side. I didn't edit their answers in any way, shape, or form. So exactly as you see them, exactly as you hear them is the way that they answered them. And I thought this was the most fair way that you'd be able to have kind of evaluate these 3 candidates. In addition, I just thought it'd be a good service instead of you poking around the internet and trying to find all the different things that are said, but they're really packaged, right? These are not. These are just some questions, and I think that you'll kind of hear their humanity come through, their personalities come through, and what I'm hoping that will give you a better idea of who you'd like to vote for the next leader of the state of Oregon. So I'm going to break this up into 2 different episodes, and you're going to be able to follow along, and I'll post the 9 questions so you can see which questions are in each episode, and I hope you really enjoy this. Now, at the end of this as well, I'm actually going to give you insight into the way I might have answered the questions or some other thoughts or feedback as the way I thought that the interviews did go or didn't go. Maybe some criticism even. We'll see. But I'm definitely going to be open about this and raw and real, and I'm here to answer your questions and feedback anytime. So without much further ado, this is not the format of the podcast I'm going to be producing at all. But in the meantime, man, I just wanted to do something that I thought would be of service, and I hope that you find this really, really helpful. So I'm going to shut up now, and let's get right to the questions. Enjoy. The first question reads like this. When you look at the American flag, what do you see? And how do you define patriotism?
I love that question. And the flag matters to me. I respect it. I think I would tell you a story I used to tell more often in the early part of my campaign that I haven't had a chance to tell as much. But, I grew up in Williamsburg, Virginia, which is really sort of the one of the cradles of the American Revolution, the House of Burgesses, where they stood up and, decided to go to war against the British Crown for freedom. And when I was a kid, I used to go on summer days when we'd play. It was really hot in Virginia. We would go into the theater, which was the only air-conditioned building we had access to as kids. And we'd sit there and listen and watch the movie that was called The Story of the Patriot. And it's a story about a family, a father and a son and the wife and the daughter, actually, making a decision whether or not they were going to join the revolution and go against some of their neighbors and friends and rise up in what they knew looked at the time like a hopeless fight. And I probably saw that movie because we'd go in there every time we were hot. I probably saw it about 300 times till it was memorized. I could still give you a lot of lines out of that movie today, 58 years later. But what I realized later in life was how much had that growing up in that area and knowing that history and what it means to fight for freedom had imprinted on me as a person, as a child. And so when I see what our schools are doing, indoctrinating the children to not believe in their country, to not believe in freedom, it's a terrifying prospect to me, because those values, freedom, liberty, life, independence, even the pursuit of happiness, I kind of like, and all of our rights and freedoms, they mean everything to me, and the flag is a symbol of all those values, so it means a lot.
When I look at the American flag, I feel very proud. I think about our rich history. I think about the men and women that have paid the ultimate sacrifice for us to fly that flag. I think when I couldn't be more proud to, like, for example, watching the Olympics. I couldn't be more proud to be an American. And it's also inspiring to think about the generations and our history and the people that have carried this flag. I want to make sure that the values and what this country was founded on, that flag represents it, right? With the original 13 colonies with our stripes, our 50 stars that represent every state, the people that it represents, and it's something that I am very proud to fly outside of my house, and I always appreciate when people follow flag code too. It's like, thank you for lighting up your flag overnight. And additionally, to your second part of the question about patriotism, I think it is more about the people that are willing to not just say what their opinion is about their values, but actually what they do with their actions. And that is what I'm seeing more and more in the state of Oregon. We're seeing it on a national level, where people recognize that, forget party politics, just conservatism in general. There's no more time to be a closet conservative, and people don't want to be coined that anymore. And so whether it's, baby boomers or Gen Z, I am finding out that more and more people are wanting and willing to get involved, and they just need to know how. And so as a party, we need to do a better job of getting younger people engaged, in my opinion. But two things that are very near and dear to my heart, and I think we have plenty of patriots out there.
That is a wonderful question. I see sacrifice when I look at the flag. I see the folks that are here now, defending it now, and standing up for it now. So I think that the biggest thing that I see is sacrifice, and then in this idea of freedom, that the freedoms that we have can be lost in a generation, can absolutely go away if we don't value them and use them and respect them enough to fight for them. But more than anything else, I think of my brother and my dad and my grandparents and all these people that fought for that flag in places that were really unsafe, and they risked their lives for us. That's what I immediately think of when my brother was serving. He sent a flag home to me, and it's just meaningful. You know, we just recently lost a firefighter here locally in St. Paul, and they had all. If you're going down I-5 yesterday, all of the local firefighters were on the overpasses, and they had the flags flying, and they were honoring their fellow firefighter, and the flag means a lot to them, and service means a lot to them, and every single time someone is serving their community, whether or not it's as a firefighter or whether or not it's your nation in the military, the flag means a lot to all of us, and it should. It means, you know, independence and freedom, but most of all, whether or not it's a local firefighter that's given his life, or whether or not it's someone fighting, you know, for our nation, it means sacrifice, and that's something that we really do need to recognize and respect. None of this can be taken for granted.
I wrote this next question just kind of give you an idea of what their personality was like what stuck out to them when they're interacting with people on the campaign trail. So the next question I read like this: tell us one of the most memorable stories or memories from being on the campaign trail so far.
Oh, there have been so many opportunities where people after you've kind of spoken, and you've kind of spoken to this whole group. My favorite time is when people come up to me and then they start sharing about themselves, and this sense that people feel like they get to know you at a level that they're willing to let you get to know them. And it's not that it's just happened once and one person. It's every single time I have the chance to speak to folks, there's always somebody that comes up, and I feel all of a sudden like I really know them and their family and what's going on in their lives. And that part of it, this ability to really connect with people and better understand what's going on with them, is my favorite part and the most memorable part. There have been kind of a million little things that have been sort of like, you have got to be kidding me. Okay, so I went to this lunch, and it was with a dear friend it was Mark Simmons actually had this lunch. I shouldn't out him. But so he invites me to connect up with some of his friends. We go to this terrific local restaurant, and I order what I always order, which is chicken. I'm super boring. I always order chicken. And so they bring me my chicken sandwich, and I'm trying not to be a mess. I'm like going to pick it up, and you know. And so I cut a bite off, and I start eating, and then I look down, 100% raw. Like, it was a complete raw chicken sandwich. And I spend the whole rest of this trip thinking, oh my gosh, like, am I going to get sick after this? Am I going to be okay? So there have been a ton of like random, unexpected things, like all kinds of weather issues and all kinds of things like that. But my absolute favorite part of the campaign, the part that sticks with me the absolute most, is this idea that when you're authentic and honest with people, and you say, I really am doing this because I love this place and I want to stand up for you guys, that people then feel comfortable enough to come to me and talk to me and share stuff that's going on with them. It just means a lot. It's my favorite part so far.
Oh my, let's see. That's a tough one. Well, one really memorable story for me, it really, really impressed me, was I went to this wonderful meet and greet in Florence, and we had it at this, it's called the Little Brown Hen Cafe. And there was a bunch of ladies, there was a few men there, all the locals, and the Little Brown Hen Cafe is this really cute breakfast and lunch spot right there on the main drag in Florence. And we had a really fun meet and greet. And at the end, I was talking to all the people, and the owner and her husband were saying to me as I was leaving, I said, it must have been really tough for you with the closures, but everybody's used to coming here. And she said, oh, they tried to kill us. They tried to break us. OSHA came in. We stayed open because we had to keep ourselves afloat and to feed the city. The workers and everything. And she said, and who stepped in and helped us was the Freedom Foundation. And I was bowled over because I'm on the board of the Freedom Foundation. And I knew that we were directing help, legal help and assistance to these businesses around the state. But I did not know that I had been standing there in one of those very places that had been saved. And it was a moment where I just thought, these mandates, what they're doing is just criminal, and what we've been doing with the Freedom Foundation is really making a difference in regular Oregonians' lives. And the other moment that I would want to mention is I did a press conference where we drew people from all over the state. Back in October 18th was the press conference. That was the day that the vaccine mandates for first responders went into effect. And we had gathered nurses, and there was a fireman there, and people who were about to lose their jobs. And we were on TV that morning in front of Legacy Emmanuel Hospital. Those people went in front of the cameras and the microphone and told their stories and begged the governor not to do it. Then when their stories were all told, and I stood up and closed the press conference, honestly, Eric, that was I had a really hard time with that. It was one of the saddest moments I've ever had, because I knew that those cameramen were going to walk away. I was going to walk away. The governor was going to walk away. But those dozen people behind me, their lives were ruined. It was deeply affecting. It was very, very sad to see. And those people are still out of work. In fact, I was at the rally for medical freedom yesterday in Salem, and I ran into one of the people that was there with her sister, and I said, how's she doing? And said, okay so far. But those people are still out there struggling. And meanwhile, our hospitals are barely able to handle the people coming in the door because they fired half of their staff, their nurses, their doctors, their techs. I mean, what a sad state of affairs in Oregon. So one of them was nice, one of them not so nice, but they were highlights.
Oh, wow. Great question. I would probably say we've been hosting meet and greets. We try to fill as much time as we can in between either a forum or if we're set for me to speak at any of the Republican events. And those are my favorite moments. We have anywhere from a range of 7 people to 25 people that show up. And speaking with ultimately what is for me where a lot of my love for country and love for my state is driven by my grandfather. I talked about him a lot, served in World War II, and we got to go to Camp Withicum. And I was so overwhelmed by the way we were greeted, and sitting down for 2 hours and finding about the fact that our National Guard oversees all the airspace for part of Northern California, for Oregon, for the state of Washington, for all of Alaska. We have one of the most robust National Guards in the country. And to go around the facility and see people in uniform and just shake hands and say thank you so much for your service and what you do, because you're ultimately people that keep us safe. And I think there's maybe a feeling and a notion that they're second fiddle to our Air Force and Marine Corps, and so for me to be able to go there and spend time with whether they're medics, whether they're actually have been in combat, and to say thank you so much for your service and for what you do, and just know that I personally appreciate it, but also as a community, I want to see as much involvement as possible to show you guys support and to show you guys love, to let you know that what you do is instrumental to keep us safe.
All right, now let's get into policies just a little bit. So the first question I read exactly like this. I said mandates. This is your time to talk about the current mandates for vaccines, masks, school closures, business closures, or any other government recent activities. This is your time to give an opinion on the way it was handled given the gift of hindsight, and what you would do moving forward if you were the governor.
It's pretty easy for me to answer that, given the gift of hindsight. I I would have, from the start, done it completely different. I would have been more in line with, say, Christine Drazan, who said, from the beginning, no government mandates. And it goes back to your question previous. I believe in freedom, and I believe in respecting the individual choices of intelligent, free adult Americans. I would not have done any business closures, no mandated business closures, no mandated school closures, no mandated mask wearing, no mandates on vaccines. And I can say with certainty that on my first day in office, I would, if they are still in place, which God help us, I hope they aren't, but if they are still in place, I would repeal every one of the mandates. It is not the business of government to interfere in these private individual choices. And I find it particularly appalling in the area of medical freedom, where, we made such a big deal a few years back about the HIPAA rights, the privacy rights. Those have been so trampled, it's just ridiculous. But, it's a pretty straightforward thing. The mandates should all be repealed and should never have been in place. That being said, I do want to say that I remember when the Trump was in office, the pandemic first hit, and people were really frightened. And they rolled out that 15 days to slow the spread. And I remember thinking, boy, people are sure willing to give up their rights here pretty quick and easy. Watch out what you're doing here. And sure enough, they never came back, basically. So I think Americans and Oregonians need to be very aware and very careful that when you give away power, give away rights, you are very unlikely to get them back. So it's something that has to be safeguarded. It has to be safeguarded from the top, from the executive branch down. So that's my position, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah. I will, on day one, remove the mandates. Vaccine mandates are gone, mask mandates are gone, and you have got to respect Oregonians enough to share information, share the facts, make recommendations, and let them navigate their own health and the health of their loved ones. They know best at this point how to keep their family members safe and themselves safe. And it's been a long time coming since March of 2020. But we know an awful lot more about this now than we did then, and there are treatments, and we need to move ahead because at some point this is going to be endemic and not a pandemic, and we cannot shut down our schools, we cannot shut down our businesses, we cannot treat this like this needs to be used to control Oregonians. That's the thing that struck me the most about how this was handled from the beginning, is that our experience of this pandemic was different based on leadership than it was in other states. It's not that it went through our population dramatically differently. It's not that we had a different kind of COVID here. We just had different politics here. And the politics here were driven by fear. The politics here were driven by control. And that is consistent with how our existing leadership, our current leadership, navigates every major challenge or problem, is they lead with fear. And I will lead with facts. I will lead with respect. I will lead with clarity. And as House Republican leader, when this whole thing started, we were, in fact, we had denied quorum in the legislature. And so we had walked out of the legislature over this terrible cap and trade bill. And over the course of that time, that's when COVID started in Oregon. And my conversations with the governor at that time were, okay, we have seen this, kind of spread across the globe. What are your metrics? How are you going to communicate with Oregonians? And I wanted clarity for people. And so my communications with her at that time were, we are all in to help solve this. We are all in to protect Oregonians. And you need to lead in a way that's clear. You need to lead in a way that's understandable, that people can know at what point things are going to change, and they can base their lives around it. And the extent to which she didn't know exactly what she was doing, and I understand that was where all of us were, she didn't even communicate that. She communicated with a level of certainty that was inappropriate. So she communicated as if every maneuver she was making, every decision she was making was going to end the pandemic. And the lack of humility where she could come forward and say, listen, this is what we know today, and this is what we're going to do today. And when we get additional information, I'm going to share it with you. And we're gonna begin to transition as we get more information. And my number one goal and priority is going to be, to make this something that we can navigate together. It was always fear, and when I would talk to her about her decisions to go back into lockdowns and the Thanksgiving that she was talking about, shutting down Thanksgiving and all those kinds of things, I can remember conversations with her where she would precisely say, well, if I don't do this today, there will be X number of lives lost. Like she was personally saying, I am in charge. I'm going to decide who lives and dies. And as it turns out, that's not how this works. She's governor, not God. And that is not how this works. And so I absolutely disagreed with her approach toward Oregonians. I did not think her approach was appropriate. Speaking of firefighters, my district has North Clackamas Fire District in it. My legislative seat did. And the opportunity, when she shut down and she had the vaccine mandate in place for everybody and healthcare workers, it affected firefighters. And I had a conversation with the leadership of that particular group, and they said, we need flexibility. We might lose 100 of our 400 folks, EMTs, firefighters, and it was like going into fire season, and it was late summer. And I went to the governor and I said that. I said, my guys, they have said they want flexibility, they want to serve the community. We all understand where you're at with this thing, but they need to be able to navigate workforce issues. And she said, nope, those guys, they shouldn't work anywhere on the West Coast. They should just move to Idaho. Now, I couldn't believe it. Like, who thinks that way? Who thinks that way? We're talking about access to healthcare. We're talking about firefighting services. And instead of saying, absolutely, I understand the concerns, let's figure out a way around this, how can I work with you? She just doubled down on the politics and actually was inviting Oregonians to abandon Oregon because they aren't, accepted here anymore because they don't comply. That's wrong. That is wrong. And that has got to stop. That's the kind of leadership that leads with fear and is power hungry, frankly, and has too much control over the lives of Oregonians. We have got to recognize that we need to navigate whatever comes, whether or not it's a fire, whether or not it's a public health crisis. We've got to do it together as Oregonians. And so I absolutely would end the mandates, every single one of them. Our schools, you cannot keep parents out of schools if they're not willing to vaccinate, right? Like, there's got to be a way to navigate this thing. And so all of that stuff for me goes away and becomes recommendations, and I will communicate with facts and not fear, absolutely, from the start.
I firmly believe that there has been a tremendous amount of government overreach over the course of the pandemic. I think it's also, we have a silver lining here in a couple ways. Parents were more informed as to what their kids were learning, and ultimately it has brought up a number of topics that maybe weren't being talked about before, and people are not woke, but they're awake. I do not believe in government being able to tell anyone, for that matter, that they have to put something in their body, or that it's required for them to put a face covering on. If data were to show me something different, I still don't. You would take every precaution possible, but you have to work with subject matter experts. I've said this before, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And if you're not surrounding yourself around people that are diverse, then you're only getting pretty much your own opinion right back at you. I also wouldn't take just data from the CDC. I'd want to know from epidemiologists, from people that are able to give us therapeutics. We're one of the most innovative countries in the world, and we still don't have therapeutics. The effect that it's had on not only our kids in the most formidable years of their lives is inhumane, and it's been a absolute disaster the way small businesses were treated, and to have OSHA and other entities coming in and inserting themselves in places that they shouldn't have. We needed a leader to look up and say, this is not acceptable. These are entrepreneurs that started businesses, and small businesses grow, and if you allow them to grow, if you said, if the government doesn't get involved, small businesses create more jobs year over year than large corporations. I think that we have allowed, and we don't have control as to what Governor Brown does. That being said, it has kind of cultivated an environment where we feel comfortable to talk about our personal medical information. Don't. That's between you and your doctor. We shouldn't be talking about these things. When a school looks up and says that they have the right to make a decision for your child, and that their voice overrules the parent, I would hope and think that everyone is scratching their head in saying, what do you mean? Well, what is happening? I would like to see the least amount of executive order come out of the role of someone that holds a leadership position, especially as governor. It should only be in the rarest of cases that you use executive order. It's important that we work with our legislative branch, and it's going to be tough. But I am not okay with the fact that many people have an extreme level of frustration because they genuinely feel like they are not being given their First Amendment right to speak up for what they believe in and not have to conform, or as I like to say, you cannot comply your way out of tyranny. And that's what this feels like. And so I think that I don't believe in any of the mandates that are currently in place. That being said, if someone wants to wear a mask and get vaccinated, that is their absolute right if that's what makes them feel more comfortable. And so we also shouldn't pass judgment on that. It's been so politicized to the point that it's created more and more and more tension, but the devastation that it's done here, specifically in the state of Oregon, is honestly a travesty. It's inhumane, it's not right, and I fully believe that the only proper solution to do that is by removing the mandates that are in place. People can make the decisions, informed decisions, that they want to. I believe that Oregonians are smart enough to make those decisions.
Obviously, homelessness has been on top of everybody's mind in the state of Oregon. So I asked him a direct question. It went like this. Homelessness is obviously one of the major issues facing the larger cities in Oregon, but it's also increasingly affecting the smaller towns as well. Why do you think we've had such a large spike in the people on the streets? And what are your specific plans to address this if you become governor?
Yeah. Homelessness is absolutely at humanitarian crisis levels. It is shocking to see how many people are on the streets in Oregon. And I have, been in LeGrand and Burns and Ontario and all kinds of small towns across our state. And people bring up homelessness everywhere I go. And, we see it every day in the metro area, but it is absolutely a statewide concern, a statewide challenge to varying degrees across our entire state right now. And the solutions to homelessness are going to be about making progress and doing everything we can to allow local governments to enforce their statutes and to restore community safety. So, it should never be okay for someone to put a stovepipe in a shanty in some public space and endanger their own health and degrade the environment around them because they're living someplace that's not intended for people to live. And so we have got to coordinate at all levels of government. We've got to engage with local leaders. This idea that people are living in tents and living under tarps didn't happen by accident in the state of Oregon. This is a direct result of public policies that have put Oregon in a very unique place where homelessness has become an epidemic here. I mean, we have Measure 110. Drugs are far, far too accepted here. And the opportunity for someone that's a public safety officer to engage with someone and get them into treatment has changed. And that is not going to serve our state long term. And the impacts of the kinds of drugs and the extent to drug use is going to continue to be a challenge. We are worst in the nation right now for access to recovery services. Bottom of the barrel, right down there with our graduation rates, which, side note, I believe have only increased because we lowered the standards. So, and so on this issue of homelessness, we've got to do what Oregonians expected and fully fund recovery services from the Measure 110 that was passed. I did not support Measure 110. I did not think that was a good idea for our state. But now that it's in place, the least we can do is fully implement it and get recovery services out where they need it. They've spent over $700 million in housing initiatives. If you include some of the homeless initiatives specifically, that number is closer to $1 billion. And that money has not solved the problem. But that money should be used to continue to support the service and expand services that are out there and available. We've got to let local governments restore order in their streets. We have to. And with compassion and with care and transitioning people into services and doing what you can to support individuals, but we can't live this way. And so leadership at the top can make a huge difference on this. You have the opportunity to prioritize homelessness. You have the opportunity to issue executive orders, in fact, emergency declarations on this, that, as we have seen, can clear the decks of some of the regulations and some of the issues that are getting in the way for really being just all in to address our homeless problem. It's gotten too bad for us to continue to nip away at the edges. It continues to explode, and so it's going to take not just the money that they've kind of thrown at this, but it's going to take individual engagement and support from local organizations, faith-based communities, local governments, all the way through this process. It's got to be an all-in for us to really resolve this.
Well, we have three intertwined problems. We have the intertwined problems of substance abuse, homelessness, and crime, and then because the associated crime that comes with those first two. So I'm going to take this two prongs. I hope I don't want to take too much time because it's a huge issue. It's a very important issue to me because, as I think you know, Eric, but maybe not everyone listening does, I'm 40 years in recovery from alcoholism. And like a lot of the people you see on the streets, I started drinking early in life at 14 years old. And then if you start at that age, it's easy to go into chronic substance abuse or alcoholism in my case quickly. And I did. I spiraled down fast. I was a chronic alcoholic by the time I stopped at 28 years old. And so grateful that I have been able to stay in recovery all these years. But it has given me some insight and a window into this problem that I think no other candidate that's running has, and some, personal, truly expertise in the area. So, because I have spent that 40 years, I've been on the board of treatment center, the DePaul Treatment Center, worked actively in other recovery settings with young people, and I've personally worked with literally hundreds of people struggling with substance abuse. So there's two things. The first is, and I refuse to call it the houseless, they are homeless. Housing first is not the correct way to go. And it should be blatantly obvious to everyone after 30 years of trying this and watching the numbers get worse instead of better, that the approach we're taking doing this housing first model doesn't work. We've got to flip it completely around and go to a shelter first, and I'm talking about low barrier, low level shelters that people that are large enough to take care of and put a roof over the head and bathrooms in place and some minimal food supplies to these people so that they are sheltered first. Then they need to be able to access treatment services. And as I know you know, but people listening might not. We have at this point they say it's second highest. It was the highest level of substance abuse per capita in the country in Oregon. We also have the lowest. We're the 50th in the number of treatment beds per capita in the country. So all those dollars and all these people, and we don't have treatment facilities for them. The money that supposedly came in through Measure 110, not a penny of it can be used for inpatient or outpatient treatment services or detox. None of it. It's not allowed to be used because the money is coming from marijuana tax, and marijuana is still not a federally approved drug. So we're in this weird cycle where these people just continually go back out on the streets, and there's what I call the homeless industrial complex, that it's all these new government jobs and nonprofit agency jobs, and there's just millions and literally billions of dollars flowing through all these with a reverse incentive to solve the problem. They have a reverse incentive. So shelter first, then treatment needs to be upgraded, and all the money that is currently going into all these supposed housing services and connections and all this nonsense, it has to be laser focused at treatment beds and at outpatient treatment services and detox services to get these people into these treatment options. I'll tell you from personal firsthand experience with lots and lots and hundreds of other addicts and alcoholics, once you get people off the street and through treatment programs, they very seldom need that much help to find their own way into housing. They will get a job, they'll get into housing. I mean, I'm sitting here as a recovering alcoholic running for governor. I have a house. I've had a house for 40 years, This is not the problem. The problem is substance abuse. And it's at the bottom of all the crime that we're seeing as well. So the second part of it, and it's important to me, is we have this giant sign on our borders that says drug use welcome here. Come on in, cartels. And I just, by the way, released a pretty hardcore video that I hope some of your viewers can watch at some point, about what's happening with the drug cartels in Southern Oregon and how that ties into the crime that we're seeing coming up through the valley into all of our communities. We have to repeal Measure 110. It was a mistake. I think voters know it. Many, 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 many people I speak to have huge buyer's remorse about having voted for it. They feel that they were schnookered. We now know that all the money to support that measure came from Mark Zuckerberg and George Soros funded entities, and we got schnookered. We got taken. We're being used as lab rats here in Oregon. And guess what? The experiment is failing. We have, what do we have? 1,000 shootings, or 1,000 shootings and over 60 homicides. We got drug cartels overrunning the Southern Oregon counties. We have fentanyl deaths among our young people skyrocketing, and overdose deaths overall way up. Well, you put a big sign on your border that says legal, everything is legal here, come on in. What did people think was going to happen? I tell you, sheriffs across the state uniformly will say, repeal Measure 110, get this thing back where we can try to manage some of this crime, and let's deal with substance abuse, and starting with clearing the streets of homeless and putting them into shelters. They may not go back into public spaces and places. They do not have a right to be in those public places and spaces if we provide minimal shelter for them. And there's plenty of money and empty buildings that can be used for that purpose. Eric, I say to people, we definitely treat our dogs and cats that are feral out on the streets better than we treat the people. It's a humanitarian crisis, and what we're doing is enabling people to commit slow suicide out there. We put the Humane Society over on Columbia Boulevard a lot nicer than what those homeless people are going through.
I think that the reason that we've seen a large spike is due to failed policy by Democratic leadership. Ted Wheeler and the way that he's handled what's specifically going on in Portland. And just recently, it was less than a week ago, on 6th Avenue, walking around these shelters is, honestly, it's inhumane to the homeless population, but also for the people in the surrounding areas. So it has offered no real solution. In all fairness, the voters did vote in favor of decriminalizing drugs. Now, that might be that we saw that there was data to show that maybe that would work. However, we put the cart before the horse. We didn't have the facility set up. We didn't have the medical care. We are dealing with a mental health crisis in the state of Oregon. And I believe firmly that putting together a plan where they're temporary, like a hexayurt, for example. So I would not have the homeless population staying in Portland. You would want to offer them to go to a location that we have land to build a space where we can put up temporary hexayurts or there's multiple options on that front. But the temporary part's important because then it doesn't incentivize people, homeless, population from California or up from Washington to come to Oregon. And I do believe that there is a large part of the homeless population that's seeking dignity, and they're on some hardcore drugs. And so making sure that they get the medical needs that they absolutely must have to get off of the substance abuse or whatever substance that they're on, and slowly cultivating communities within that space and then having them give back to the community in some form. So whether it's picking up trash, whatever that solution we come to, but I think that the dignity part is and the compassion part is very appropriate. These are human beings we're talking about. There is a category of the homeless population that is their lifestyle, and they will travel from state to state, and they've always been doing that. That's going to be a big challenge because the other part of why this is happening is if you give unconstitutional stand-down orders to your law enforcement and don't allow them to do their jobs, this is also a direct result of that. Unfortunately, we don't just have, as I've heard from my other colleagues, well, let's give them a bus ticket one way out of here. Not a solution. You also can't technically remove people from like public parks and different spaces based off of different legislative bills that have been passed. So it's going to be a challenge, but I can tell you that if you go directly to these DAs and you make sure that officers are allowed to do what they want to do, we will see a major difference in what's currently going on with our homeless population. It really is being on the road. If you want to talk about the memory that sits with me that I think about constantly, that's at the top of the list. It's beyond hard to watch and see.
Let's get into public schools for a minute. Obviously, it was an important question for me, obviously being a dad of 2 kids in the public schools, but I know a lot of you guys have concerns as well. So I asked him this question. What are your thoughts on the current status of our public school system as a whole in Oregon, and what's your specific plan for the system, if any, if you become governor?
Would it be too harsh to say that I think it's really in shambles at this point? Just really in shambles. I mean, when I moved here in 1978, I think we were number 2 in the country. We might have been number 3. I should look that up so I know it because I always have to hedge that. But I know we were very good, and the kids were just, the scores were off the charts, and this was uniform. It wasn't like the minorities were struggling. It was uniformly, the schools were doing beautifully. So now, where are we? Well, I think we're about 46th, and we're 47th in our graduation rate. What we're doing in the schools right, and this, I'm not surprised that the academic results are this bad, because we spend an inordinate amount of time indoctrinating our kids in the schools. There is a lot of time spent on it. And, you know, some of my opponents haven't spoken up very vocally that have been in elected office against the public employee unions and the role that they've played in allowing the watering down of our kids' academic education. It's unacceptable. Those results are absolutely unacceptable. We cannot continue like that. So, you know, right away when I get into office, one of the very first appointments I would like to make is a new deputy superintendent of public instruction. And that person's mission and goals will be to completely revamp the vision for public schools in Oregon, turning to academic excellence, turning to setting high standards and having measurable standards in the schools so that we know how we're doing. You know, I'll be lucky coming in as governor because it's hard to get much worse. So there's nowhere to go but up on these standards, and happily, but for the kids. But, you know, the parents have been locked out of the schools, and one of the benefits of COVID is they've had a chance when watching their kids online during virtual learning to see what it is that their kids are not learning. And again, when you spend all this time on indoctrinating, it's that much less time you have to teach good academics. And I just think we haven't set a high bar. I think you're going to see quite a bit of change, not just at the deputy superintendent level, but on down through the Department of Education, with a new vision, a new approach, a new mission. And the second part of the school issue is that I plan to do everything I can to fully empower parents. Now, the way that is done is probably from the bottom up, from the school boards up. And I've said on the campaign trail, and it'll be fun to do this, I will go door to door with school board candidates who are running on a platform of taking their schools back and empowering parents, empowering them to choose their own curriculums, to have a say in what their kids learn, to have a say in what schools their children attend, and you know what kind of a curriculum they're being offered and what kind of standards are being set for them. I'll go door to door and campaign with them. The parents need to take their schools back, but they need to be empowered from the top down to do that. And in the end, the part of empowering parents is that money should follow the child in public schools. It should absolutely follow the child. I'd be open to all kinds of education reform and school choice options to improve our results. And this is nowhere more important than it is in inner city Portland and with minority populations. They are by far the worst served by our public schools right now. And it's our elected officials should be ashamed of this failure, absolutely ashamed of their failure. And I think that people in those communities need to understand, if you want things to improve for your kids, if you want them to learn, to be really challenged to be excellent, you need to change the people you're voting for.
So we've got to get politics out of the classroom. We've got to get politics out of the classroom. That is a distraction from our kiddos actually achieving their best future, and it applies a whole different layer of complexity for the relationships that parents need to have in the classroom with their teachers and with their schools. And so the best way to get focused in our schools is to have clear expectations that what we're going to do inside the classroom is we're going to teach core curriculum in a way that's not political. We're not going to have a lens through which we teach math that says if 2 + 2 = 4, you're racist. That's unacceptable. We need for our kids to actually learn the basics. And so as superintendent of public instruction, the opportunity to appoint people to the Oregon State School Board and to serve in that capacity is the opportunity to refocus our schools and to demand, to create high expectations for our kids in a way that says, we believe that you have a path to your best possible future. We're going to help you get there. Whether or not that's career technical education, whether or not it's going into the workforce, joining the military, going on to college, whatever that path looks like, our public school system needs to actually provide a path for them to achieve that. And we do need a strong public school system, and we need options. We need school choice. We need alternatives for families that are not well served in a traditional public school classroom. And that has got to be a part of this conversation. In recent sessions, I supported legislation to take the cap off for, right now there's a 3% cap on charter schools within a district. I don't think that's right. I think parents need to have access to whatever learning opportunities support their child. And I don't think that we should artificially limit that based on some protective version of what our public school system needs to hold on to. We have got to sustain funding for our public school system without harming kids that need something else. We have got to say we're all in for the student. And if what we're providing for our kids is not getting them the future that they deserve, it is our responsibility to take a look at that system and say, we're not going to be protective of special interests and institutions. We're going to stand up for students and families, and we're going to turn our education system around. It is absolutely going down the wrong track when the focus is entirely and 100% on not how kids are performing, not on outcomes, but whether or not people feel good about some of these larger social issues that they're driving through the classroom. The classrooms are a place for kids to learn how to think, not what to think. And I know people say that, but entering into classrooms right now, it's a real mixed bag what you might get based on what school district you're in, all that sort of stuff. We need to set high expectations across the state that our kids are actually going to earn diplomas and they're going to be prepared for their future. And I love the idea that parents can opt out from stuff inside our classrooms right now. They absolutely can. And I love the idea that parents also, for any of our schools, anywhere in our state, a parent can go to that school and they can request to see the curriculum. I don't know if people know that, but any parent can say, I want to see the curriculum for my child's classroom. And you can have a very clear understanding of what curriculum is being taught to your students, and then you have the right to opt out of any portion of that you choose. That is how our existing state law works. I mean, more parents need to utilize it, more parents need to be engaged and recognize it. And frankly, the school districts, I think, have an obligation to communicate with parents and let them know that that's at their disposal to improve communication and collaboration with parents and families. And for those that don't feel well served by their school boards, run. And because school boards will pick curriculum for your schools, and that is a very, very important moment.
My thoughts on the public schools. Well, we rank 49th out of 50 states in terms of graduation rate. So the solution that's been put forward is you no longer have to be literate, nor do you have to have basic, simple math skills to graduate. Awful solution. So competition is something you'll hear me talk about a lot, and creating competition in education is a good thing. I am proposing a $7,500 tax credit. The reason being is, as you already know, our funding for our public schools comes from the state level. I think it's important we give it the power back to the local levels, pretty much on almost all fronts. As I travel more and more, there really isn't one county that's the same. That being said, what the $7,500 tax credit would do is, right now we're roughly about 33% of kids are unenrolled, but they're under Governor Brown's mandate, they're still being budgeted off of the 2018-2019 budget. They're also getting incentives for having the vaccine clinics on site. So if that unenrollment's already there, and we go back to a quarterly basis of funding, and you can use that voucher, or it's not a voucher, a tax credit for whether you're homeschooling them, if you put them in private school, you can utilize those funds for that, charter school. It's going to, the main reaction I get is, so you're not in support of our public schools? No, I absolutely am in support of our public schools. What ends up happening is the superintendents and school boards are going to go, oh my goodness, now we're actually seeing the impact of these 33%, group of kids that have unenrolled. We don't have the funding that we need. Maybe we should take a meeting and open up our school board meetings publicly again to hear what parents have to say, so they're willing to put their kids back into the public school system. And that is something we saw in Virginia. It's something we saw in New Jersey. And parents, teachers have unions and they're powerful. Kids have something so much better than that. They're parents. Let parents decide what they want their kids to be taught and what they don't. I am not in favor of CRT and equity. That being said, I think there are other pieces of curriculum that you could put in place. For example, Black History 365, the most comprehensive Black History textbook I've ever read, at maybe a high school level. And let the county decide if they want to use that. Because I can assure you that here in Bend, in Deschutes County or Harney County, it's going to be very different. I'm sure Deschutes County would adopt a curriculum like that, but this is an elective course. Harney County, probably not. So it also just kind of reaffirms how important it is to make sure you're paying attention to who's running in your local races, because it's just as important who your city council members are and your school boards as it is voting for your governor.